You know that feeling when your favorite song comes on and you can't help but move? That rhythm in your bones? That soul in the melody? You're feeling the creative genius of enslaved black people. Your music teacher lied to you. Your textbooks lied to you. Your streaming service is lying to you right now. That playlist labeled Classic American Music, it should be called Songs Stolen from Slaves. Because every guitar riff, every vocal run, every rhythmic innovation that defines what the world calls American music was created by black people who were legally considered property. Elvis didn't create rock and roll. The Beatles didn't invent those harmonies. And they've spent 150 years making sure you never found out. But we have the proof. In 1867, 3 white abolitionists published a book that would expose the greatest cultural theft in American history. Slave Songs of the United States contained 136 songs that had never been written down before. Songs that enslaved people created to survive, to resist, and to hope. In this video, we're going to uncover how our ancestors didn't just endure slavery. They created the entire foundation of American music from plantation fields, and how close this history came to being lost forever. But first, I need you to feel what Lucy McKim felt. Close your eyes and imagine this. Lucy McKim thought she knew music. She'd been classically trained on piano since childhood, studied European composers, mastered every technique they taught proper young ladies in Philadelphia. She came to South Carolina in 1862, thinking she'd teach freed slaves to sing correctly. She had no idea she was about to discover that everything she'd been taught was worthless. It's dawn on St. Helena Island. The Union Navy has just driven out Confederate forces, and for the first time in 250 years, black people in the South can sing their songs without fear. The first voice that rises from the field stops her cold. It's not just the melody. It's something in the way the notes bend and twist, something that makes her chest tighten and her eyes water without knowing why. Roll, Jordan, roll. Jordan, roll. Jordan, roll. Then other voices join in, creating harmonies that shouldn't exist according to every music theory book she'd ever studied. The rhythm pulses through her body in ways that European waltzes never could. She's hearing intervals no European composer had ever imagined. This is what they stole from you. This feeling, this power, this music that moves your soul before your mind even processes it. That's the genius of your ancestors flowing through you right now. When slavers ripped our ancestors from West Africa, they destroyed the drums and banned the dances, believing they could sever every connection to home. They were catastrophically wrong. Our ancestors transformed cotton fields into laboratories of musical innovation. Work songs that coordinated brutal labor became vehicles for coded messages. Ring shouts where people moved in circles, clapping and chanting, kept African spiritual traditions alive even when dancing was forbidden. Consider the sophisticated intelligence behind Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. On the surface, a simple religious song about going to heaven, but listen closer to what enslaved people were actually singing. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. That chariot? Underground Railroad conductors. Home? Freedom in the North. The song contained detailed instructions for escape routes, coded in religious language that masters dismissed as harmless Negro spirituals. Every song was an act of creative defiance that declared, "You can chain our bodies, but you cannot chain our souls." The sophistication of this musical resistance network was staggering. Take Go Down Moses, which appears as song number 43 in the 1867 collection. White overseers heard a biblical story about ancient Egypt, but enslaved people were singing their own exodus. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Egypt represented the plantation South. Pharaoh was the master. Moses represented deliverance itself. And years later, when Harriet Tubman guided people to freedom on the Underground Railroad, they would call her Moses because of this very spiritual. Wade in the Water contained specific escape instructions. When Tubman sang this song near plantations, it meant stay in the water to throw off the tracking dogs. The Jordan River in dozens of spirituals. The Ohio River marking the boundary to free territory. But here's what's most remarkable. Masters often forced enslaved people to sing while they worked, never realizing they were listening to military-level strategic planning set to 4-part harmony. Speaking of songs that were nearly lost forever, If you believe these hidden histories of musical genius need to be told and remembered, subscribe to Black Stories Untold and help us spread awareness of the stories they tried to erase. Now, back to the video. November 7, 1861. Union naval forces stormed Port Royal Sound, South Carolina, in a coordinated attack that shattered Confederate control. Within 24 hours, terrified plantation owners abandoned their estates, fleeing inland and leaving behind 30,000 newly freed enslaved people on the Sea Islands. The area became the Port Royal Experiment, a massive test of whether formerly enslaved people could manage their own affairs. The government sent in northern missionaries, teachers, and labor supervisors. Among them, William Francis Allen, a Harvard-educated classical scholar, his cousin Charles Pickard Ware, just 23 years old, and Lucy McKim Garrison, that piano teacher whose musical training would prove crucial. None of them expected to document the foundation of American music. Charles Ware was stationed at Coffin's Point Plantation on St. Helena Island, managing cotton operations. In the evenings, he'd sit with the freed people and listen to songs that had been hidden for generations. What he heard challenged everything he thought he knew about music and intelligence. These weren't primitive folk songs. The melodic structures were sophisticated. The harmonies created intervals that European music theory had never explored. The improvisational systems allowed songs to adapt in real time. Different verses for different circumstances, modular sections that could be combined based on who was present and what messages needed to be sent. Ware began frantically writing down lyrics and melodies, racing against time because many freed people wanted to abandon these slave songs and move toward more respectable music that would help them fit into white society. Lucy McKim faced an impossible task. How do you write down a blue note, that bent, soulful sound that falls between the cracks of a European scale? How do you capture the vocal techniques that made these songs unlike anything in formal musical education? Working with freed people on St. Helena Island, she developed new methods to document sounds that had never been notated. She used additional markings to show when notes should be bent or slurred. She created symbols for the call and response patterns, where one voice would lead and dozens would answer back. Song by song, they documented an entire musical universe. My Father How Long from Florida contained 7 different verses that could be sung in various combinations. I'm in Trouble used vocal techniques that transformed a simple melody into something heartbreaking and powerful. Jacob's Ladder incorporated West African rhythmic patterns that had somehow survived 200 years of cultural suppression. The collectors realized they weren't just preserving music. They were documenting proof that enslaved people had maintained and evolved one of the world's most sophisticated musical traditions while living under the most brutal conditions imaginable. But even as they worked to preserve these songs, they faced resistance from an unexpected source. When slave songs of the United States hit bookstores in 1867, the reaction was immediate and shocking. Music critics who expected primitive songs instead found complex harmonies, intricate rhythms, and poetic lyrics that rivaled European traditions. The book preserved exact dialect and pronunciation. I'm gwine to Alabama. Oh, poor sinner suffer here. Oh, my Lord delivered Daniel. Oh, why not deliver me too? For the first time, white Americans could read the authentic voices of enslaved people, unfiltered by minstrel show mockery, but the implications went far beyond music. If enslaved people could create art this sophisticated while living in chains, what did that say about every racist assumption white America had made about Black intellectual capacity? The collection contained songs from across the South, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, revealing a connected musical network that spanned the entire plantation system. Song number 31, Michael Row the Boat Ashore, showed how melodies traveled and evolved as they moved from plantation to plantation. Number 104, later known as Down in the River to Pray, demonstrated the sophisticated theology that enslaved people had developed within their own spiritual framework. This single book destroyed the myth that Black people were culturally inferior, providing ammunition that abolitionists used to argue for full citizenship rights. October 6, 1871. 10 young Black college students from Fisk University in Nashville stepped off a train in Cincinnati, Ohio. They were broke, desperate, and carrying the weight of their entire institution on their shoulders. Fisk University was $20,000 in debt, and this group of singers represented their last hope for survival. Their first concerts were disasters. Performing European classical music to prove their respectability, they drew sparse crowds and meager donations. After 3 weeks of touring, they had barely raised enough to cover expenses. Then came Oberlin, Ohio, November 16, 1871. Standing before a gathering of congregational ministers, soprano Ella Shepherd made a decision that changed American culture forever. Instead of another European art song, she began singing "Steal Away to Jesus," one of the spirituals from the 1867 collection. The effect was electric. White audiences who had never heard authentic plantation songs performed with such power were mesmerized. The harmonies, the emotional intensity, the sophisticated musical arrangements, nothing in their European musical experience had prepared them for this. Word spread like wildfire. The Fisk Jubilee singers went from struggling students to international sensations. They performed at the White House for President Grant. They toured Europe, singing before Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace and before European nobility who had never heard anything like American music. Most importantly, they raised $150,000, enough to build Jubilee Hall and establish Fisk University as a permanent institution. But their success proved something revolutionary. When Black people controlled their own narrative and presented authentic culture, the world recognized our genius. What happened next was unprecedented. The musical innovations preserved in that 1867 collection began spawning every major American musical form at lightning speed. In Black churches across the South, spirituals evolved into gospel. Mahalia Jackson would later take songs like Precious Lord, which borrowed heavily from spiritual structures, and transform them into powerhouse performances that moved both Black and white audiences to tears. During the Great Migration, work songs and field hollers traveled north in the hearts of Black families seeking better lives. In Chicago, these songs evolved into urban blues. Musicians like Muddy Waters took the call and response patterns and blue notes from plantation songs and electrified them, creating the harmonic foundation for all American popular music. In New Orleans, something even more revolutionary was happening. Congo Square, the only place in antebellum America where enslaved people could legally gather and play drums on Sundays, became a laboratory where African rhythmic patterns merged with European instruments to create jazz. The syncopation came directly from West African musical traditions. The improvisation mirrored the way spirituals had adapted in real time on plantations. The blue notes were identical to what Lucy McKim had struggled to notate in 1867. By 1920, American music had conquered the world, and every innovation traced back to techniques developed by our ancestors in chains. August 28, 1963. As 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial for the March on Washington, they sang songs that connected them directly to their ancestors' resistance. "We Shall Overcome" adapted the spiritual "I'll Be All Right," proving that songs created in slavery still had power to topple Jim Crow. When protesters locked arms and sang together, they were using the same community-building techniques that had sustained enslaved people through the darkest periods of American history. The Freedom Singers understood what white supremacists never grasped. Music doesn't just reflect struggle, it builds movements. The call and response patterns that had once coordinated cotton picking now coordinated the destruction of legal segregation. But even as our music powered the freedom movement, the pattern of cultural theft was accelerating. Here's the pattern that's repeated for over 150 years. Black people create musical innovation. White society discovers it. The profits flow upstream while the creators remain downstream. Elvis Presley becomes the king of rock and roll in 1956, performing music that artists like Sister Rosetta Tharpe had been perfecting for decades. The techniques, the vocal style, the guitar work, the stage presence, all came from Black performers who remained unknown to mainstream audiences. Hip-hop emerges in the 1970s as the latest evolution of our ancestral traditions. DJ Kool Herc uses turntables to extend drum breaks, creating new rhythmic possibilities. Grandmaster Flash develops scratching techniques. Africa Bambaataa builds the cultural framework. Within a decade, white executives are making millions, while the creators struggle for recognition. The pattern never changes. Black creativity emerges from struggle. White society repackages it. The original innovators fight for credit, while the appropriators get rich. But here's what the thieves never understand. They can steal the surface, but they can never capture the soul. Turn on any radio today. What you're hearing is the direct descendant of those 136 songs preserved in 1867. When Beyoncé uses melismatic vocal runs in Freedom, she's channeling techniques developed in secret slave quarters. When Kendrick Lamar builds call and response into his live performances, he's using the same community engagement methods that sustained our ancestors through slavery. The blue notes that define everything from B.B. King's guitar to Alicia Keys' piano originated in Lucy McKim's attempts to capture sounds that couldn't be written with European notation. This isn't just musical history. This is proof that our ancestors didn't just survive oppression. They created innovations so powerful that they still define American culture 150 years later. Every attempt to silence Black voices has failed because our creativity evolves faster than oppression can contain it. Those plantation songs that nearly disappeared became the foundation of global popular culture. When you hear any American music today, you're hearing the voices of our ancestors refusing to be silenced. Black Stories Untold exist to arm you with the knowledge they've systematically withheld and prove that our ancestors were creators, innovators, and the true architects of American culture. If you believe these stories of Black excellence need to reach every person who's been lied to about our history, subscribe to this channel and help us turn hidden secrets into undeniable knowledge. The truth is preserved in archives and digital collections, but it's up to us to make sure it doesn't stay buried there. Will you be part of keeping that legacy alive?